Hi, my name is Ash Patel, and today I'm going to be talking about my business ethics paper. So, to start with, my issue is it morally permissible for athletes to use performance enhancing drugs? I'll be using four different philosophers to argue both sides of this issue. So, I'm going to start with utility, and I'm going to start with Peter Singer. Peter Singer will be in favor of performance enhanced drugs. So, I'm going to list his premises. All humans are equal is a prevailing political and ethical orthodoxy. Humans differ. Differences apply to many characteristics. Thus, principles of equality are useless. Ethics is a kind of mutually beneficial agreement. Moral personalities may not be able to be used as a basis of equality. Having moral personality is a matter of degree. Not all humans are moral persons. So, possession of moral personality doesn't gratify the basis of the principle all humans are equal. There's no logically compelling reason for assuming that a difference in ability between two people justifies any differences in the amount of consideration we give to their interests. We must go beyond a personal or sectional view and take into account the interests in all those affected, unless we have sound ethical grounds for doing otherwise. The essence of the principle of equal consideration of interests is that we give equal weight in our moral deliberations to the like interests of all those affected by our actions. What the principle really amounts to is an interest, whoever's it may be. The principle of equal consideration of interests, therefore, may be a defensible form of the principle that all humans are equal, a form that we can use in discussing more controversial issues about equality. Okay, so now those were Peter Singer's premises, so now we're going to move on to the issue. An issue exists where performance enhancing drugs should be allowed. A performance-enhancing drug is any substance taken by athletes to improve performance. This term typically refers to anabolic steroids used in sports by professional and amateur athletes because anabolic steroids are the most common used drug in sports. An athlete is a person who is trained or skilled in exercises, sports, or games requiring physical strength, agility, or stamina. For example, a man who is 6 foot tall will have an advantage in some sports over someone who is 5 foot tall. The equality needs to be settled by giving the fighter speed, strength, stamina from performance. Competition can be unfair if there is unequal access to particular enhancements, but equal access can be achieved more predictably by deregulation than by prohibition. Unfair is not based on or behaving according to the principles of equality and justice. Deregulation is the reduction or elimination of government power in a particular industry, usually enacted to create more competition within the industry. Prohibition is the action of forbidding something, especially by law. Therefore, athletes need to be allowed to use substances to close the gap of unfair advantages. Not being able to use performance-enhancing drugs is like allowing equipment to be advantages. For example, if one player in a golf tournament used golf balls that flew significantly further than balls used by opponents, even when struck with the same force, the tournament is arguably unfair. Not allowing someone who is much weaker than a competitor use anabolic steroids would be like allowing someone to use a ball that goes further in golf. So going back to Peter's premises, humans differ. Differences apply to many characteristics. We must go beyond a personal or sectional view and take into account the interests in all those affected, unless we have sound ethical grounds for doing otherwise. The essence of the principle of equal consideration of interests is that we give equal weight in our moral deliberations to the like interests of all those affected by our actions. The principle of equal consideration of interests, therefore, may be a defensible form of the principles that all human are equal, a form that we can use in discussing more controversial issues about equality. Therefore, higher physical capabilities between competitors are deemed unequal. Competitors want equal opportunities as their peers. Only advantage competitors want is their work ethic over others. It is in all competitors' interest to have the same challenges as others. So, athletes should be able to use performance-enhanced drugs to give equality in everyone's interest. So, that would be the conclusion to my Peter Singer argument, and we will move on to Jeremy Bentham. And because he is also utility, I will argue against performance-enhanced drugs using Jeremy Bentham. So I'm going to list his premises now. Morally permissible acts provide the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest number while preventing the most pain. In order to determine the amount of pleasure or pain and the means to effectively generate such pleasure or pain, a principle for determining utility is required. The principle of utility is constituted by 7 variables of measurements: intensity, duration, certainty or uncertainty, propinquity, remoteness, and extent. So, intensity is a measure of degree of extremity, concentration, or depth. Duration is a measure of temporal continuance. Certainty is a measure of confidence, probability, for or against a predicted event. Propinquity, remoteness, is a measure of the immediacy of an event. Extent is a measure of exponential effect of an event's product on a field of individuals with decreasing immediacy. Okay, so we will now, we will now move on to the issue. The use of performance-enhancing drugs would be morally impermissible because it does not provide the greatest amount of pleasure without preventing the greatest amount of pain. So, going back, a performance-enhancing drug is any substance taken by athletes to improve performance. This typically refers to anabolic steroids use in sports by professional and amateur athletes. Pleasure is a feeling of happy satisfaction and enjoyment. Pain is physical suffering or distress as due to injury, illness, etc. Okay. Sorry, my computer's really slow. Come on. The negative effects these drugs can have on one's body make USADA's mission paramount as to why no athlete should ever have to consider PED use to succeed in sports. Consequences from drugs include pain to the body. Pain defies the first premise. Steroids can have harmful and unpleasant side effects for men as well. These include acne, baldness, heart disease, hyperextension, impotence, stroke, liver damage, and prostate cancer. Steroids can also alter one's mood and increase aggression. Steroids are one of the most common used performance-enhanced drugs. Steroids provide many unpleasable side effects. Mood is a temporary state of mind or feeling. Aggression is a forceful action or procedure, especially when intended to dominate or master. So, altering an individual's mood and aggression would not bring the greatest amounts of pleasure to the people surrounding them also. Therefore, utility does not exist within the use of steroids. Steroids are a form of performance-enhanced drugs. So, the use of performance-enhanced drugs would be considered morally impermissible. Okay, we will now be moving on to deontology, and I will start with Immanuel Kant. And using Kant, I will argue against using performance-enhanced drugs. So, here are his premises. A person must act in accordance in universal law. A person is a human being regarded as an individual. A human being embodies the ability to have reason and goodwill. Reason is the sufficient ground of explanation or of logical defense, something that supports a conclusion or explains a fact. Goodwill is the only thing that exemplifies goodness without qualification. Goodness cannot arise from acting or impulse. Goodness cannot arise from acting on impulse or natural inclination, even if impulse coincides with duty. Duty is obligatory tasks, conduct, service, or functions that arise from one's position. There are three statements of the universal law. A person must act universally. Acting universally is making choices, which can be held to apply to all people without involving inconsistency. If the action would be good only as means to something else, the imperative is hypothetical. A person must act in such a way that they treat persons as ends and never simply as means to ends. A person must act to legislate the kingdom of ends. The kingdom of ends is a systematic union of rational beings. Morally permissible acts are acts in which a person acts universally, treats a person as means to end, and legislate the kingdom of ends. Morally impermissible acts are such that violate one or more of the premises. Okay, so now those were his premises. We will move on to the issue. It would be morally impermissible to allow the use of performance-enhanced drugs in athletics because it would be universally unacceptable. A performance-enhanced drug is any substance taken by athletes to improve performance. Athletics is exercises, sports, or games engaged in by athletes. Acting universally is making choices, which can be held to apply to all people without involving inconsistency. The inconsistency in work ethic is the reason behind personal accomplishments. Work ethic is belief in the moral benefit and importance of work and its inherent ability to strengthen character. Personal accomplishments are acts done with credibility. Credibility is the quality of being believable or trustworthy. So, using performance-enhancing drugs would make an athlete not credible. Performance-enhancing drugs disrupt the universal law of rigorous work ethic by all persons. If all persons are not working hard, then all persons are not acting in accordance to Kant's universal law. Performance-enhancing drugs are taken for improved endurance and strength. Improved is to bring into a more desirable or excellent condition. Improvement through performance-enhancing drugs is cheating. Cheating is cheating is to deceive. It is universally wrong to deceive. If a person deceives, they are not acting in accordance to what is good for society. Society is a body of individuals living as members of community. So, athletes should not be able to use performance-enhancing drugs because it is universally wrong and deceitful. Okay, so that was Kant's argument. Now we will move on to our last argument, and I will be using W.D. Ross to argue in favor of performance-enhanced drugs within athletes. So here are his premises. What makes actions right is that they are productive of more good than could have been produced by any other action open to the agent. When a man acts to promote his own interests, he is acting from a sense of self-interest, not in of rightness. A great advance in character is made by the productive of the greatest pleasure instead of the greatest good. When a plain man fulfills a promise because he thinks he ought to do so, it seems clear that he does so with no thought of its total consequences, still less with any opinion that these are likely to be best possible. Pleasure is not prima facie good. A duty can be considered a moral obligation. A prima facie is neither the actualization of a bad disposition nor undeserved. A duty can be considered a moral obligation. Duties stemming from one's own previous actions can be fidelity and reparation. Fidelity is duty to fulfill promises or agreements into which one has entered. Reparation is duty to make up for wrongful acts previously done to others. Duties stemming from the possibility of improving one's own condition with respect to virtue or intelligence can be self-improvement. Self-improvement is duty to improve one's own condition in these respects. So, moving on to the issue. Banning performance-enhancing drugs from athletes is morally impermissible because it is not producing most good within athletics. To ban is to prohibit, especially by legal means. A performance-enhancing drug is any substance taken by athletes to improve performance. An athlete is a person who is trained or skilled in exercises, sports, or games requiring physical strength, agility, or stamina. 16. Is the action of banning performance-enhancing drugs right when it's preventing more good to more athletes? Anabolic steroids are very common performance-enhanced drugs. Bodybuilders and athletes both use anabolic steroids to build muscle mass, reduce fatigue, and enhance performance, allowing many to perform tirelessly at the most physically demanding sport. Sorry, one sec. Society has deemed these drugs to be wrong, when it can be in more people's interest because of their benefits. When coupled together in a cycle of doses, steroids make it possible to achieve results that otherwise would have not been possible. Athletes tend to want to be the best as what they do. Great athletes will do whatever it takes for them to reach the highest level. These drugs can help them get there quicker and stronger. A great advance in character is made by the productive of the great pleasure instead of the greatest good. Excuse me. If these drugs are bringing a greater amount of pleasure, wouldn't it be right to legalize them? People who don't want these drugs to be legalized shouldn't take them if they are. If each of us ought to be free to assume risks that we think are worth taking, shouldn't athletes have the same freedom as anyone else? It is the individual's moral obligation that helps them make choices. After all, if we should not forbid smokers from risking their health by smoking, why should we prohibit track stars or weightlifters from taking risks with their health in pursuit of their goals? Pleasure is not prima facie good. Therefore, it is the individual's duty to be able to evaluate what they want to put in their body. Human growth hormone appears in WADA's prohibited list of substances and methods, even though the Food and Drug Administration, the National Institutes of Health, and the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists have vouched to varying degrees for its safety. Many athletes carb load to gain mass and muscle. Human growth hormone is a drug that helps athletes do this quicker and better. If it is in the interest of many individuals and is proven to be safe, the use of this drug can be promoted to be right. It would also bring more pleasure to athletes because they wouldn't have to carb load and spend as much money on food. Duties stemming from one's own previous actions, fidelity, and reparation These drugs can help many athletes achieve their goals, which also bring good to their family and the people around them from their achievements. It is one's duty to determine the action they choose to take in the sense of rightness and produces more good. Therefore, if it is okay to hurt your body by smoking cigarettes, taking performance-enhancing drugs as an athlete, self-improvement should be morally impermissible. And that would be the end of my arguments. Hope you guys enjoyed.